Today, you're with us for volunteer orientation beyond the basics, co-dreaming for rooted, reflective, and community-centered volunteerism with Breauna Dorelus of Connecting the Cause. And what we will cover today, we will identify common orientation pitfalls that reinforce saviorism or charity mindsets and how to shift them. We will explore ways to honor and center community voice throughout the orientation process. We will implement ways to integrate root cause framing into orientation content to deepen volunteer understanding. And make sure to stay to the end because we're also going to discuss why reflection is necessary in orientation spaces, different forms of orientation and how to infuse these practices in multiple forms, and how to move away from the performative feeling of switching some words to another to intentionality and collaboration. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Breauna to get us started with framing our time together. Breauna?
Thank you, Court. Thank you, Erica. Hey, everyone. I'm incredibly grateful to be with you today, and incredibly grateful that you are taking the time to show up. I know people say all the time, you could be doing anything else, but you're here with me, and that is so true on my end. There's so much happening in the world, so much happening in your work. And so taking the intentionality to be able to be here today is absolutely a first step in rethinking some of the things we're going to be sharing today, specifically around orientation. Sorry in advance for the long title around rooting and co-dreaming and all the things, but I had to put it all together because we're going to be talking about some great stuff. So before we get started into the content, I want to talk about just how we're going to frame our time. And you see this on the screen. I'm going to also read this out loud. This is going to really center us in the conversation, the type of conversation we're going to be having today. So it says, we are community-centered. We are connected to an organization that has a community-centered mission. Creating harm towards the communities we serve and partner alongside derails that mission and our own. So then we must consistently and fervently ask ourselves, what am I doing to create or carry out harm that derails that holistic mission? What parts of that must I be accountable to for creating that harm? And what can I do in my power to repair and rebuild? I want to start off our time by sharing this because it's incredibly important to recognize that in some ways there are instances where volunteerism can cause certain spaces of harm or certain spaces of not being able to really show up for community in the way that we should. I don't want us to walk away today saying Breauna hates volunteerism, or it's too critical. It's actually because I love it so much. That's because I want to know the good, the bad, the ugly, to the how can I show up as our best selves as a sector. Volunteerism, it pumps in my blood, it's in my DNA. And because of that, I want to look and see, these three questions. When I'm in volunteerism spaces, when organizations are in spaces of service, how are we showing up? And it's especially also important to be able to show up even in the space of orientation. And so I want us to just be thinking about these three questions if we want to continue to have just a really fruitful conversation. What am I doing to create or carry out harm that derails the holistic mission of showing up well? What parts of that must I be accountable to? And what can I do in my power, because we do have power, to repair and rebuild?
Absolutely. So, Breauna, talk to us a little bit because the words co-dreaming were in the title. Talk to us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So co-dreaming is a framework that was created out of my lived and professional experience of being a volunteer engager, of being the coordinator, the manager, the director, being an AmeriCorps member, and all these forms. And as I continue to show up in these spaces, there were certain aspects of the work and of the best practices and of the frameworks that did not center folks in the way that they should have been centered, specifically when it came to community members. And so when I think about co-dreaming, the number one thing I think about is I don't want to just know folks and community members based on their need. I want to know them based on how they like to see themselves thrive, and how can I create a space through volunteerism where I am meeting that dream that they have for themselves. And so it's less about just what do you need and more about what are your dreams and how can volunteerism be a resource? How do we galvanize movements to make that happen? And so co-dreaming is this very community-centric approach because we first have to identify and uproot traditional and current volunteer practices that may cause harm. We have to identify it, we have to call it out, and we have to know what those are. We have to also be able to then name root causes. It's not just about showing up and volunteering. It's why are you having to even show up and volunteer in the first place? Are we communicating root cause truth telling of how and why formal volunteerism exists in the first place and how it can currently hold up supremacy and white saviorism, right? And then in a lot of spaces, we have to then work towards a now and a future that centers the community and being the driver of truth and holder of justice. So we can all move forward in partnership and accountability. And so when we think about that co-dreaming, it's really about identifying harm, understanding root cause, working together in unison so that we can all show up and be accountable to one another.
Incredible. I really appreciate your rooting our session in that way. And talk to us a little bit. I know I read your bio earlier, but talk to us a little bit about your personal experience in this work and why volunteer orientation felt so important to talk about. Because when I asked you when we were talking, I thought, what do you feel like is the most important thing to talk about? Just share a little bit about that and why it felt important to talk about today.
Yeah. All over the world right now, someone is in a volunteer orientation. What power do we have as a sector that there may be 15, 20, 30, 5, 2 people in front of us who we have their attention, they are open to hearing what we have to say, and we have the capacity to share about community and share about why this matters. That's a lot of people. I wish there, you know what? I wonder if there is a figure somewhere in the world that we could come up with of or assess how many people are in a volunteer orientation around the world at a given point in time, right? It'd be in the thousands, the 100,000s, right? And so I think it's incredibly important that we don't look at orientation as a checkbox, right? I think it's so incredibly important when we are introducing the work that we are rooted in just not the tactical checkboxes, but we are also thinking about if someone wants to have an experience, a transformative experience, are there places and space within our orientation where that can actually happen? Because I know from my experience being a Black woman, specifically in volunteer engagement, I started to see a pattern in the places that I worked where it was a very clear of who was the giver and a very clear who was the given to. And in those places and spaces, I thought to myself, why is there such a difference? There's folks who look like me that we are serving, that we're working alongside, But then so many of the volunteers in my experience and spaces did not look like me. And so I wanted to navigate this and look at this. And one of the aspects of where I saw harm on the other end of volunteerism was the fact that, wait a second, our orientations could have set up volunteers for success. Our orientation could have been a chance to talk about bias. It could have been a chance to talk about the stereotypes about the place and the space. It could have been a chance to really talk about food insecurity, right? And not just that people need food, but what are the conditions of why people need to have food in the first place? So looking at orientation and seeing the discrepancies of pity and paternalism that I was seeing in my role, I was like, orientation could have been a catalyst for being able to understand and recognize where people are and have those critical conversations. So we set up not only volunteers, but community members for success. And even if it's not a particular person, it may be the end user, may be animals, the end user may be the environment, whatever the case may be. Are we telling the truth in these spaces so they can actually connect to the cause they care about from a place of liberation and a place of care, and not from a place of pity and paternalism?
Awesome. All right, let's dive in. You've got a question for us.
Yes. So just would love to hear. When you think of the word orientation in the volunteerism context, what words come to mind? So go ahead and list them in the chat. Shannon said requirements, preparedness, preparation. Yes, I see. Okay, education, training, awesome. Rules, background, welcome, learning, introduction, examples, guidelines. Okay, great. Values, I love that. Information access, mission. I love somebody, I think Krista, you put up inclusion. I love that. Compassion, understanding, relationship building, familiarizing yourself. Yes. Getting to know the volunteer better, including their goals. I love that there's an inclusion of goals there. Elizabeth, be real. Yes. She said boring and repetitive. Yes, it can absolutely be that. I don't know how many times. All right, y'all. Welcome to volunteer orientation, right? Compliance, that's real. It can absolutely be compliance. Essential. I absolutely believe it's an essential. Mark, I love that. What volunteers can expect of us? That's good. That's good. Safety, which is incredibly important, Chloe. Thank you. Building trust. Awesome. So many good ones. So many good ones. So when we think about orientation, I want to, what do I want to do? I want to move us into some different thinking, some alternative thinkings when it also comes around volunteer orientation. Because I have done plenty of orientations in my lifetime of being a leader of volunteers. And I absolutely got into this rigmarole of we got to do it. It's a requirement. It's an expectation. But what helped me and allowed me to re-navigate this is that orientation is not just an introduction to task. I want us to look at it as an invitation into relationship, an invitation into responsibility, of communal care and responsibility, an invitation into repair. It may repair relationship. It may repair groups of people being able to work together. It is a starting point for building trust on both sides, right? Of understanding systems. Why is it that I am here? What are the systems? When I'm talking about systems, I mean educational system. I mean the healthcare system, right? What systems are actually behind what we are engaging in today, and how a lot of our work is engaging in systems and how those systems are not meeting, right, the thriving of folks, right? So This is the starting point for understanding those systems and aligning with community-led values. It is a place of grounding. What it's like to connect people to history, to community wisdom, and to root causes. It is liberatory, and it can be liberatory, planting seeds of imagination for what justice and co-creation can actually look like together. Like I said, it's an invitation into reflection and collective responsibility. And it also serves as a mirror. When we have reflection and thoughts around orientations, it is offering a space for self-location, figuring out where we are in this space. Who am I in this space? For accountability and for motivation checks, right? I want to make this line clear. Orientation is one of the first lines of defense against extractive volunteering, because right up front, it allows folks to understand not just the logistics, but how to move and act and be in volunteerism. I remember standing up one day in an orientation, and I literally said, I don't know where you have been or what you've been doing as far as other volunteer opportunities are concerned, but this is a community invitation. And this is, I'm going to show you how we do volunteerism here, right? So it's a welcoming in, and it's also a level setting. And I think it's also important to make clear that what I am not saying is throw all policy, all logistics out the window. We need to know where the bathroom at, okay? We need to know how to not, be in a place if something happens where the exit is. We need to sign the paperwork, right? And it's also important to add so much of this in this work in order to be able to move forward. And so I have Karen, you are in the chat. And you said extractive volunteering, ? Yes, thank you for asking that question. I'm going to go ahead and dive into it. There have been specific situations in volunteerism, in the volunteerism lifespan, in my own lived experience and experience of other nonprofit organizations, where volunteerism can be extractive. When I say volunteerism is extractive, it means that it is not centering the community that folks came to serve. It is centering the volunteer specifically in the ways of happiness, if they had a good time, and if they had the best experience. There are often times in this work where my boss used to ask me, Breauna, did the volunteers have a good time? Were they happy? And that was the centering of if I did my work and if I did my job well. There was not a conversation of, but were they actually impactful, and did they treat community with dignity and respect? And that is when I talk about extractive volunteerism, I talk about using volunteerism as a tool potentially for that harm to happen. And so we need to make sure that we're in a space where, as we are cultivating volunteers, we are also making sure that we are making sure that community stays in the center of the work, because that's why volunteers are there in the first place, and that's the work. I have a lot of resources and stuff on that. And so absolutely, you could take a look at Connecting the Cause, and there's some more information there. I know, Megan, I think this is an incredible question too. I'm sorry, I'm going off track, but I think these are good questions to answer. Can this happen in context when the beneficiary is a garden or plants or environment or programs? Absolutely. I've worked with clients where it's not directly a particular person that they are going to be engaging with as far as orientation, but absolutely it can happen in the context of garden and plants and environment. Really thinking about, hey, volunteers, thinking about the overall context of why environment matters and what harm we can do as people to harm environment, to harm spaces where we need to be cultivating the earth, right? So that truth telling still applies. And being able to create senses of values and connectedness to that cause is exactly what I'm talking about here, in that volunteer orientation.
So
So,
let's talk about the essential
yes, yes,
information. What does that mean? And how do we reassess it?
yes. So, oh, I remember being, where you are and having to go through the orientation. And I want us to reassess what essential information actually looks like. Essential information does not only have to entail the who, what, when, why, and where of volunteerism, it also needs to include how am I creating a space for where when they leave and they go to a bar, or they go to a family reunion, or they go to a business gathering, and someone brings up something about what I'm connected to, or that cause, are they going to be able to share information that is shifting information, right? So let me tell you an example of this. If your entire orientation is filled with the logistics and the who, what, when, why, where, the organizational chart, and who's the president and CEO, and all of that is so heavy, they can't go back and regurgitate the information. People on the outside don't care about what the information is. What people are going to care about is my mindset was shifted in orientation. I thought this coming in. I now think this about this issue. I now think this about this cause. That's something that they can carry with them, that they can share. And that's what ignites volunteerism. And that's what ignites other people wanting to come in. And the first line of that, right, is the orientation. So essential is reflection. Essential, of course, is logistics, but it's also why are we here in the first place? It's also these people have joy and you are partnering with their joy, right? What is the essential information that's needed that's outside of the day to day so that people can have something to latch onto?
So, Brianna, talk to us about, I know you're going to give us some takeaways about how to to work through these challenges, but let's address the challenges first and talk about what's
Yeah.
most common when it comes to volunteer orientation.
Yeah, I have been doing some good work with organizations as a consultant, looking at their orientation, assessing orientations, and these are some of the common challenges that I see that we sort of kind of lean into. Now, not to say, number one, that this is the end all be all. Also, not to say that some of this stuff it is important. I really want us to grab onto nuance in this conversation. I think it's incredibly important that it's not an either or. We are going through this as a yes and. Okay, so let's grab on to the nuance that some of this can bring. So, one of the things that I have experienced is, and I've seen others, is an overemphasis on logistics, centering the organization and not the work. You didn't hear me say that logistics aren't important. It's an overemphasis. So, what happens when we overemphasize the centering of the organization, the centering of the logistics? Number one, framing the orientation around rules and branding and liability can signal that volunteers are there to be doers and not partners. Okay. That's one thing that overemphasis can do. If it's logistics heavy on the orientation is comprised of what you do and you don't do, what you wear, where you sign in, it without balance, what that does is reinforces a transactional mindset. I am here for the hour. I am here to do the 5 things, but really taking a step back and really providing context, right, as to why you are doing the things that you're doing, right? Another piece that is a challenge is having a focus all on the organization. The long history back in 1886, we were created, and you give the whole thing. I've seen it. No judgment. No judgment, because what we do, we center what's being done, right? But what does that do? When we hone in on the history and programs and staff, and it takes up so much time, how can we do a little bit of Cliff Notes version and then really get into collaborating, right? Really talking less about that stuff and more about the collaborative work that's about to be accomplished alongside neighbors and partners. I've seen one-sided narratives about the community. This is another place where harm happens. Explaining to folks in the orientation, here is the population you'll be serving without the involvement of community voices and community success. So I'm going to talk specifically in the next couple of slides how to actually implement some of these things, like how would you involve community voice? But that's a big thing that I see. We're talking to people about a population, and we're not using and utilizing those voices in order to be a part of the orientation itself. Phrases within the orientation, and it still happens today. This is not something that happened before, just before historically. They need you. Today, you're the hero. That can brand savioristic language, and it can frame volunteers as saviors and perpetuate unequal power and hierarchy, right? Being able to switch and change the perceptions is really going to be important as we navigate how to, these pitfalls. Another one, including one community story or one community quote for optics to say we've included people, right? Without sharing decision-making power or continuing dialogue is tokenism versus really engaging in real practice, right? That is going to be important. Tammy, I know this is I'm talking a lot. It's a lot of information. I also specifically put so many words on the slides so that you can have this as a copy. So yes, this is all here and you'll be able to have it. When I say including one community story or one quote, that's just to check the box to say, oh, their voice is in, without actually realizing that community can be in a space of being able to connect with the volunteer orientation. I'll tell you, there's an organization called A Place at the Table. Court, you actually may know this organization because I think it's in your area. It might be. No, actually, I'm thinking North Carolina, South Carolina. It's in Raleigh. But what they do is the folks that they are serving and they're walking alongside, they annually take a look at the actual volunteer orientation and assess the volunteer orientation to ensure dignity and respect is infused in it. And they are talking about the clients in a way that infuses dignity and respect. And so I think there is such a way to be able to navigate what it looks like to be able to do this in the right way. And then I think there's some more challenges to come that we can talk about. This next piece, hold your pearls, brace yourself. We're going to go. Corey said I could be who I want to be on here. So I'm going to tell the truth. Okay. One of the challenges that I've seen is centering volunteer comfort over truth telling. So what we end up doing sometimes is avoiding hard conversations about race, about power, about privilege. And specifically, we are doing that because we're not saying it for the sake of saying it. I'm talking about there is actual racial power dynamics that are making you have to volunteer in the first place, and you're not talking about it, right? That directly impact their volunteer experience. Or I've seen folks directly omit harder topics that the community themselves have experienced that are connected to unjust systems, but we're not going to talk about it to keep volunteers happy and to avoid being too political. If there is a reason that there is food insecurity in a place, and you say these people don't have enough food, but you don't say why they don't have enough food, and the food, why they don't have it, is directly connected to what type of neighborhood that is, you are not telling the truth. You're not telling the whole truth. So then what ends up happening is people become the project to be solved. Okay? We stop looking at the system that made those conditions possible, and we just start looking at people, and we say, oh, you should go further to go get food, or you should grow your own food, instead of saying, no, people in general want healthy food, and there's a reason why they don't have it, right? So let's get real and tell the truth about why they're even volunteering. That's not political. It's the truth. It's a fact. It's documented, right? So we have to be okay with challenging volunteers, because if we really want volunteerism to be a movement of change, we got to talk about what we got to change first, right? Another thing that I see is using scarcity or crisis to motivate. Volunteerism is a long game. If you're focusing on urgency or deficit, we need you because there are people out here struggling. What that does is it exploits pain for buy-in, okay? Instead of centering dignity and being able to say, there is so much good that is happening here. We want you to partner with the good that already exists. And there are some boundaries that are prohibiting that good to happen. So we want you to connect your resources with their resources to move this forward, right? Right? So we can reframe and not use scarcity as a tactic for pity, but really use the buy-in of, we're in this together and we need each other. And that is the reason why you need to show up. I've seen this as well, one and done orientations, right? Treating orientations as a checkbox. But I want us to know, I've been there. I'm not judging you. There's been times I've done 5 orientations in a day and I'm like, I'm tired. Okay. By the 4th one, I'm like, my energy is gone. The inspiration is depleted, right? But as we work through that, we have to think of orientation as being a point for a projection of a shift in mindset to happen, right? And the last challenge that I sort of kind of see often is overloading with theory without practical integration. What do I mean by that? That's a lot of words. You say stuff like anti-racism. You say stuff like we are with the community. You say stuff like we do with and not for. But once the volunteer actually starts, it's completely contradictory to what you said at the orientation. It's completely different than what we got inspired, we got hyped, we got excited. And then on the other side, there's a lack of dignity and respect that volunteers see and that the community sees when the actual volunteer experience and the community invitation actually takes place. So there's another piece of saying big thought words and big things to make people feel included, and they're not actually included in the process when it gets, down to the wire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that question is, how do I practically live out that centering dignity in the work? So talk to us about taking that co-dreaming approach into our orientations.
Yes. So I have in parentheses co-dreaming approach to orientations and being, real about why I'm nervous to share these. I'm nervous to share these ways of being and co-dreaming because I also don't want this to turn into a checklist. I also don't want this to turn into we're going to change words, we're going to add a community voice, we're going to do A, B, and C, but then actual policies within the handbook don't change that support what you are trying to go towards. That there are particular things within volunteer engagement, within the strategy that are actually unjust. So I want us to take this in nuance and understand the dynamics. And I'll go through some of them, but understand the dynamics of what you're going to have to do in order to make this shift, right? So I'll give you an example. It's not just about changing the words. It's about also understanding your own bias and stereotypes about the community that you're serving. That way, there is not just a change of words, but it starts to come out. It starts within and starts to come out, right? So then you don't necessarily need a checklist because you're doing the work of really assessing the ways that you have looked at best practices that actually aren't maybe the best for all. It looks ways of why is it that I look at this community in a particular way, and is that showing up in the orientation process or in the ways that I connect with community? I know that I give surveys out to volunteers to hear their experience, but I don't give surveys out to folks who are on the receiving end to see if they had a good experience with our volunteers, right? It's really it's a long game process of reevaluating these things. It's looking at volunteerism as, even though we're volunteer coordinators, volunteer managers, how do we also include community in this work? So I want us to not look at this as a checklist, but really look at it as something to move forward in. So one of them is, we talked about all of it, but now I'm talking about the practicals. Root cause framing. Root cause framing in this context is the practice of grounding volunteer engagement in an understanding of the systemic and historical and structural factors that actually created the conditions they're going to have to navigate on that day. So we don't start the story with they need. We don't start the story with here is your task for the day. We start the story with here are the conditions that led up to this point. And no, it doesn't have to be an hour. No, it doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It can be 3 bullet points of 3 significant things that happened and a link. If you want to learn more, we can share this link out so you can learn the historical context of this cause, right? By naming who has even historically held power and who has been excluded, it challenges volunteers to reflect on the ways that people are not the problems to be solved. So the orientation include, why is this happening, right? Include who created or benefits from these conditions. Who benefits from this particular school system being underfunded, right? What are the policies, the power dynamics, and the histories that uphold, right? And when I think about orientation, it's not that 1 hour, right? It's not that 30 minutes, whatever the case may be. You can send them stuff beforehand. Once they sign up and they say we're ready, send them a video. Would love for you to look at this video before you come, because it's going to be a discussion, once we get here, or I'm going to reference this video or reference this article, right? Once we show up. So being able to spread it out and also not feel like you have to do all of that at one time. Also, it may be a long history, right? Why is land usage here in this way and we don't have green space for this particular community, right? Being able to say, you know what, there's other resources available for you. So you're able to go and share it in that way, and subsequent trainings that are going to come up that we're also going to be able to dive deep into. So that's one, root cause framing.
I'm so excited for you to talk about this too. This feels incredibly important with the conversation that you're talking about, and orientation and community, and um, you know, really honoring the community that we're all a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually one of my favorites to increase in orientations is I want us to honor the good work that already exists. This stops saviorism in its tracks in a lot of ways. Um, some volunteers need to work the muscle of being motivated by community progress and not pity. It's our responsibility to help them do that, right? So when I say they need the muscle of being motivated by community, what we tend to see is, oh, if we say a community is thriving in certain ways, we won't get volunteers to show up because they're going to feel like they're not needed. When in actuality, we can say this community has joy and this community has brilliance. And we want to make sure that they continue with that joy and that brilliance. So we're here to make sure that that happens through the food that they eat, through the education they access, through the green space that they have, right? Being able to share in that way is going to be incredibly important because now the goalpost is liberation. The goalpost is community care. The goalpost is not pity. It's not stripping someone away from their autonomy. So here is some actual language for you to use. First of all, I want you to begin with the picture of joy, of brilliance, of what's goodness is happening. Not on a savioristic tip, but on a tip of like, look what's already good here. This is what you're about to partner with, right? Start the conversation centering the good and then communicate the barriers that harm that joy. So here's an example. I'm going to read it. You're stepping into a space where the community is already leading solutions. Your role is to learn, support, and share power as we collectively address the systems that created this gap. Use your own words. Don't just use mine. If it doesn't feel natural, use your own words and what it looks like for you to be able to move forward in saying that. And you can say there are families, elders, youth, and organizations who've been building together and holding each other down long before we arrived. And we're so glad that they're inviting us in this space to be able to work alongside them, right? Our role is to walk alongside that brilliance, not to replace it and not to rescue it. This space we're stepping into is already rich with resilience and strategy and solutions, and we want to partner with that, right? So, what is it like to practically design the orientation in that way? I want you to think in your orientation who's already working, what's already working, even outside of the organization, what's happening in the community. What is what's the prerequisite for that? The prerequisite for that is for you to know what's actually happening in community. Is to go out and see what good is being done so you can share that good within the orientation.
And this slide, I feel like too, Brianna has so much strong language that could, be replacing some other language that maybe in the past has been used. And so there's like a really good model here for that language shift. I see some folks asking questions about that. And I also really appreciate the creativity and the nuance that you bring to this conversation. Let's talk about this next one, power sharing practices. What does that mean?
Absolutely. When we think about power sharing practices, and I'm seeing in the chat, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your comment. I really appreciate that. And Lauren, yes, I think that's awesome. Being able to apply that training with folks that are not affected. And I love the fact that you are using orientation to facilitate folks who have already been a part of that particular disease and been affected by that disease. So I think that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Lauren. When we think about power sharing practices, too often expertise in volunteerism, because we got a CVA, because we got the thing, we are the ones that are in front, or because we have the experience of being the volunteer manager for 10 years, 5 years, we're the ones at the front. And so, Lauren, I think your comment came at the perfect time because it's not it shouldn't be by the direct experience of us, but it's that direct experience of those affected by the issues. So I think you read my slides earlier. The redefinition, there's a redefinition of expertise that needs to happen, right? It teaches us to value proximity over position. So folks who have actually lived in this experience or have been affected by the experience, how do we partner with them in the actual orientation? So also when we talk about centering the community voice, we have to think about power sharing practices. So here's an orientation example. And to say, sort of kind of framing it this way, power sharing isn't about agreeing on everything. It's about trusting the people who live here to know what's best. And since we trust the people who live here who know what's best, these are the volunteer opportunities that are going to work best with them and their power, right? So here's a design practical. I want you to be able to frame the organization as a facilitator, but not the center of the work. We are here in support of to walk alongside community. It is not about our programming. It is not about the ways that we have staff. It's not about the ways we show up. It's about the way we all show up together, right? And navigating it in that way. Also, feature local community leaders as co-facilitators. If you have budget for trainers, for people to come in, have them be guest voices and share their actual experiences within the community. This creates a sense of that power sharing and that connectedness. I also think it's incredibly important that community members who live there are also volunteers who are cross-pollinating with someone from a different zip code, from a different place, so they're able to share in this collective work. So it's not just about moving towards saviorism and somebody else coming in, but we're all actually working together. Erica, you put up a really good question. Some of these seem geared towards in-person volunteer service. How would you transfer some of these practices to volunteers virtually or in dispersed areas? I think that is incredibly important, and you can absolutely do that. So many volunteer orientations right now are still virtual. And the way that I am talking to you now, as far as communicating some of this, is a virtual way of communicating orientation, right? Having slides, sending something beforehand, right? All of this information is virtual and or in person. And even you can have reflective moments. Hey, we're going to pause here for a second. I'm going to put a reflection up on the screen, take 3 minutes to think about it. Now we're going to share it out. Hey, we're going to talk about, root causes, right? We're going to talk about spaces where there may be shared connectedness, being able to move forward and thinking about how do we do this from a virtual perspective. The information is still relevant and it still stays the same. So that's a great question. We can go to the next slide, Court. Okay, explicitly state what dishonors dignity. This helps to prevent harm before it happens. Do we share, right? Do we share specifically, what dishonors dignity? When we assume volunteers know better, when we assume we know better, we will automatically act, or we'll automatically act with cultural humility. We actually leave space for that unconscious bias to rise up, for microaggressions to happen, and other forms of harm to go unchecked. So naming harmful behaviors directly, which I have done multiple times in the past, protects everyone, right? It protects volunteers, protects staff, protects community. Remember, boundaries are not barriers. Boundaries are not barriers. They are agreements for mutual respect and trust. Volunteers need to know what not to do as much as what to do, right? So doing this work up front, you'll also reduce that burden on community members to constantly teach or manage harm in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of so many specific examples that have been really helpful for different teams that I've been a part of. And sometimes it is important to know exactly what not to say that might feel really natural to you, but might not be um, honoring dignity within the environment that you're a part of in this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's some examples. I'm giving you some practicals. Here's some script here. Let's take a moment to name some of the ways harm can show up in volunteer spaces. I know some of you may have not heard of the word harm and volunteerism in the same breath, right? So, but it's important that even harm can happen here despite good intentions. So we want to be specifically clear. We don't want to assume you know the ways to show up. So we want to set you up with success by being as clear as possible. So first, to honor community, we must acknowledge what dishonors it. So I just listed, that was some language. So I just listed some examples that I've had in the past, that I've communicated in the past of what is a dishonor, right? So taking photos or video of people without consent, speaking over or correcting community members about their own lived experience, right? Responding defensively when offered feedback or correction. These are some things that I've talked to in detail. There is actually an organization that writes these things out in details and has volunteers sign it that they understand. Not that they're perfect, right? But if we need to call you to the table and address some of this, are you open to receiving that feedback? And there's a yes, or there's a, there's a let's have a conversation. And so I think that that's incredibly important. When we talk about what dishonors dignity, you need to say what actually dishonors dignity. What all of this is for, centering community voice, right? Traditional orientations often speak about communities without inviting them into the room or acting as if they are a separate entity being studied, right? This reinforces a power dynamic where organizations and volunteers are the knowers and the communities are just the recipients. So centering community voice flips that. They are the truth tellers. They are the leaders. Communities, the co-educators. What I mean by that, folks, is not necessarily that a community member, if you could do this, I think it would be phenomenal having someone who's been a part of your program before, who's alumni before, being able to show up at certain orientations or provide certain trainings. But what I mean by this too is I'm going to communicate to you that we are thinking these ways because we've talked to community, because we've had conversations with community, because we are in relationship with them, and this is what they're saying, right? That's what I mean by centering community voice. And so a design practical, begin with community-centered art. Start with music or a story, right? That they have created, that they have done to show that community voice. And use community voices as educators, not just testimonials, which I think is a hair, but I think is also important. Because sometimes I've been in an orientation where the testimonials is, oh my gosh, you volunteers are awesome and amazing, and we love to have you here. And that's the testimonial, which is fine. But the community as educators is, this is what happened in our community back at this time, and this is why these things are happening, right? We are here to uplift, and our community is vibrant, and we are here to create change alongside you, right? That's a different conversation. And so those are some design practicals for centering community voice.
So, Brianna, what are some of these next steps that all of us can take, knowing that the work doesn't end?
Yes, I've said some of these, and I'm just going to reiterate. Orientation does not have to be a 1 hour slideshow. It can be a hour of reflection. It could be 30 minutes of looking at an art piece from the community and asking what people see, right? Curate articles to send before or prep them beforehand. In order to do this work, you have to understand your own biases, your own areas of growth, right? And then when you do this, it becomes less of a language shift and more of an embodiment of the practice. And I'm gonna say this again, add reflection, add reflection. What did you think about this community before? And what do you now know to be true? Add that as a reflection, and that could open up a world of conversation. And be okay that you will not see the end of this work. Be okay that it's going to be reiterative. You got to look at it again and look at it again and look at it again. And it's not just going to be an end all be all.
Incredible. Thank you. And I just want to say here we have like 2 minutes left, but
Sorry, I feel like I
no,
ran
no.
over.
Please connect with Breauna at connectingthecause.com. And, she partners with organizations to do this work each and every week. And she has an incredible offering for an orientation assessment. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can use the QR code there to fill out that initial questionnaire. And we had so many incredible questions. Maybe we could take one
I
or two.
know.
Think.
If you want to stay on, I'm fine with that. And if you just email me at Brianna at Connecting the Cause and you have a burning question that wasn't answered, if you email that email, it's me. It's no virtual assistant. It's nobody else showing up. You'll hear it from me. But yes, we can absolutely take a question for the road.
Yeah, Erica, do you see any questions? I know you've got a lot coming through right now. Um, we've
There's
got,
one that I'll raise. It's kind of I'll give a summary. We're asking about how to balance negative vibes, maybe volunteers who aren't meshing so well, whether that's from their background experience or lived experience, especially when one is maybe a little bit older or potentially a donor, how to navigate those feelings and the two volunteers.
the I'm trying to I'm assuming it's I shouldn't assume, but I'm hearing that it's the feeling with them not necessarily wanting to lean into some of the things that we just talked about and them wanting to say like I actually want to be transactional. I actually just want to do this and get out of here. Is that what?
This is kind of the vibe that I'm getting as well.
Okay.
Maybe somebody who's a little bit more stuck in their ways, but also vocal and
Yeah.
used to being involved inside the organization.
Yeah. Um, well, one of the things that I think is incredibly important that even, orientation for sure is a leveling ground and there is potential to be able to communicate and say, as we are all in this together and as we are navigating this together, these are the certain values and expectations that we have, for volunteers. I think it's interesting that sometimes we lean very heavily into policy and procedure of that if someone breaks that, then there's consequences for that. But we also need repair conversations and a repair plan that if someone is not in the same avenue as far as values or connectedness, then that there is a protocol for being able to have those conversations. And it's for everyone. So if there is a problem from a community member all the way to an actual volunteer, all the way to a donor that's not respecting the space that we're trying to create, then it is going to then be necessary to have a repair plan for what a conversation should look like so everyone is contributing in the right way. And you could give them the option. This may not be the best place for you to volunteer. And we don't have to live off of scarcity. Everybody ain't got to come here to volunteer. Quality over quantity, and that also protects community members as well.
yeah, I really appreciate there were some words really standing out to me and conceptually a lot of this idea of community that doesn't involve a hierarchy, and it's
Yeah,
collaborative and that can be that can almost be a tough paradigm to break out of, I think.
it is. It is. And it takes practice and it takes work and it takes implementing one thing from all we talked about today. Implement one thing, then implement the next thing, then try to change a little bit of the language the next time, right? You don't have to boil the ocean. Just take a pot and just take a little bit of water out and do something with that, right? Don't feel like you have to change the whole ocean. Just make sure that you could do one little thing and make a plan, start changing things. And so also not to overwhelm yourself, because I'm not trying to burn you out either, right? So one little thing at a time. So yeah.
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying too about language because I know you have the Designing Volunteer Opportunities with Dignity workbook. It's like a mini guidebook that people can access on your website. And it also feels like how you write volunteer opportunities leads into how you would orient
Yes.
volunteers to the organization as well. So like, maybe changing some words there can like lead you down a path of and how you're recruiting, the words you're using in your recruitment. I feel like all the wisdom that you brought today can feed into all of those different parts of the volunteer process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I have that, and then I think that's important. This is a journey. The orientation is not just isolated, and so there is other parts of the process that feed into that. And if you have questions, like I said, connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to brainstorm and think through. Email me, right? Because I think I want the best for community and I want us to be the best without the burnout. So please connect with me if you need a brainstorming session or if you need somebody to talk to, and I'm absolutely there.
Also, Brianna, just one last question as you touched on burnout. Do you feel like as you begin, piece by piece implementing some of these shifts and changes, do you feel like actually some of these practices can be burnout prevention for volunteer managers in their role, in the sense that it can create more collaboration and create a more dignified environment for everyone involved? I'm curious about your insights on that.
Court, you about to get your own webinar, sis, on what you just said. Yes, ma'am. That's deep. Yes, yes. Incredibly important. Y'all, this work is community work. Whoever said that volunteer managers have to wear all these hats and do it on our own lied to you. There are people in community that want to walk alongside, work alongside, and this is absolutely moving towards sharing, collective care, and creating an ecosystem of care so that volunteers are showing up for each other, right? So that community members are showing up for each other. These are the catalysts, for those, to be able to move forward. And so absolutely, this in itself, co-dreaming is a form of self-care for volunteer engagers, because we're not supposed to carry it all. This is sometimes in Atlanta, I'm here in Atlanta, we call the city, it's a group project. Now, sometimes group projects, some people just don't carry their weight. We're talking about the good group projects, right? Where everybody's involved, everybody's connected. This is absolutely a group project for volunteerism to shift into movement and not just hierarchy and just carrying it on our own. So that's such good insight. Erica, you said one more question. If I want to answer, I sure can. I can think through it. If anybody else has thoughts in the chat, I'm not the expert. So, how to handle asking for photos and videos from the impacted communities, wanting to avoid the sense of obligation, but also create a dynamic content to share impact. Yes, yes, yes. Relationship, relationship. If I came up and I just started working somewhere and there's a community member, hey, is it okay if I take a picture? Take a picture really quick. Yeah, sure. And they're going to probably say, yes, sure, because there's a power dynamic that you're from the organization and they don't want their services to stop, or they see that there's a power shift that if what happens if I don't. The number one indicator to know that if in your relationship with folks is if they can say no to you. If they can say no to you, you know you're in relationship. So what my first thought is, I don't go off the bat in getting pictures for the sake of impact. I know that's not what you're exactly saying, whoever said this, for the sake of impact, but the impact happens when the relationship happens. So it may take some months, it may take a little bit of time. Permission, absolutely, right? In all occasions, but don't ask permission before you're engaging in the relationship. And if you see that there are, here's a step further that I think is incredibly important that I've seen an organization do. After they've taken the picture, they show the picture to the person who was in the picture, and they send them the newsletter or the caption before it's printed to ensure that that's the way that they want to be dignified. And so I think that it absolutely starts with, that relationship building. And that means you're going to sort of kind of have to be in community with these folks. They can't see you when it's time to take the picture. They just can't see you when it's time to do the service project. It's also, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee. Hey, let's hang out, not for extractive purposes, but because I want to be in relation and community with you. So that's a short answer for a good question.
Breauna, I want to say thank you so much for your time today and the attention and intention that you gave this session. Knowing that we haven't had the chance to talk about volunteer orientation and really getting to the root of how we can design something for orientation with dignity and with community joy at the center. This is feeling really good to move forward in this way, and to come back to this presentation as a touchstone as we can continue to edit and iterate and co-create together. So I can't say thank you to Breauna enough, and thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to come and be present with each other here. And please do look for an email from us to follow up with the resources we've mentioned. We want to make sure we get you to the links to Breauna's website, the orientation assessment, the Designing with Dignity guidebook, also some podcasts and other blog post resources that Breauna has been a part of, and also the recording from today's session. So I can't say thank you enough, but thank you.
Thank
And
you. Thanks to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for letting me be who I want to be on this call and say the things that need to be said. There are not a lot of opportunities I get where I can just be me, and I have to coddle and I have to, sort of kind of suppress, but I didn't feel like I had to do that here. So thank you to everyone for accepting me, for all of me and my passion for this work. And I hope to connect with all of you in some way in the future. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Court. Thanks, Erica.
yeah, absolutely. Our pleasure. And we'll also make sure to drop your LinkedIn as well so that folks can connect with you there. That's such a great space to stay in touch with what everyone's doing kind of on a day-to-day basis as well. So I thank you very much, and look for an email in your inbox from us here at Get Connected. And we will see you next month in July. We're actually going to be hosting Dr. Sue Carter Kale, and we're going to talk about co-creating corporate volunteer opportunities that are actually mutually beneficial. So that's going to be a really exciting webinar, and she's going to bring us some new research. She's going to share some practical examples of what that can look like to create partnership in that way. And so we hope to see you all in July for that session as well. And thank you so much. We'll send that out, Colleen. Erica, I think I might have that on the resource sheet if you can drop it in the chat, but we'll also email it to everyone. That's Breauna's LinkedIn. Perfect. All right, so look for an email from us, and we will log off, and we'll see you all very soon. And thank you, Breauna.
Thank you all.
Oh, there's the chat. Uh, Everyone, just in case you're still here, there's the there's the new webinar for July in the chat. You can click to it. And we'll see you at that one too. All right. Take care. Have a beautiful day.